Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. So I'm going to try something a little bit different this week, and I'm trying to get used to these new tools I have. But this week, what we're going to do is I'm going to try to lecture this way, and we're talking about Chapter 2 in our book this week, which is about imperialism. And it's appropriate because Chapter 1 was about the Industrial Revolution, and on a global scale, when you look at these giant trends, big long line history, the Industrial Revolution really changed things. And as we're talking about this time period of, somewhere between 1700 and 1900, it's important to relate the Industrial Revolution to imperialism, so that's what we're going to do. So I am scrolling through Blackboard. If you're watching this video, you probably want to make it full screen. And again, this is for week 3, imperialism. And I have a map here of India, and I picked the map out of the textbook. And the reason I did was because India is really an example of probably the biggest and earliest colonial movements from Western civilizations. And in this case, it is England who, takes over the Mughal Empire of India, in the 1800s. And this map, it shows various colors and patterns. I mean, these territorial holdings shift all the time. But basically, I just wanted to get a feel for what imperialism is. And really, the chapter talks about imperialism in 3 areas. One of them being India, of course, so we have the map, and then the other one is Southeast Asia, so that's down by the Philippines and Vietnam, if you know that area, down in the South China Sea, sort of down there, and then the last one, of course, is Africa. And so the deal is, the short story, the 3-minute speech, is that in the mid 1800s, a new wave of Western imperialism started. And what that means is countries like the U.S. and England and Belgium and Spain, I mean, you name it, they were all now seeking to take over new territories. So when you think about imperialism, that's what it's all about. It's about one country going and taking over another country and saying, hey, you are our possession. And that's, we know the story. So the U.S. Still has Puerto Rico, and that came about because of the Spanish-American War. But these interests were all over the world in the 1800s. So it was really the age of imperialism and colonization. Now, one thing to be very clear here about, and the book states it right up front, and it's very important because you have an assignment this week, and this is a critical part of the assignment, is that imperialism kind of came in 2 waves, and the book just mentions this in passing. One of the waves was like the time of Columbus, okay? So that's about 500 years earlier than what we're talking about right now. So Columbus, Magellan, Cabot, those early explorers, the first ones to go around the world, all of those guys, they were after like gold, spreading Christianity, and bringing back spices to the king and queen. So that was sort of their deal. I think the book mentions, to summarize early imperialism, all you have to say is Christianity and spices. So, that we're not studying that stuff. What we're studying now is this new imperialism, or this Western imperialism. And the reason it's important we make a distinction is because what's happened in between Columbus and the time we're talking about, well, the Industrial Revolution. Chapter 1 happened. So with the Industrial Revolution, there's mass production. With production, there's 2 things that happen. A, you need raw materials to make stuff. Okay, so think of when the automobile, was adopted or invented in the early 1900s. All of a sudden, there was a need for tires and gasoline. There was never a need for that stuff before. So if there's a need for tires and there's no natural rubber or latex in the United States, for example, what does the country do? What do people do? Well, they either go try to find natural rubber on the market somewhere, or they just kind of take over the country that has the rubber plantations and say, hey, we're taking this over. And so that's that latter thing, where a country was just taking another country over basically for natural resources. That's what this new imperialism is about. So when you're asked the question on your assignment to describe a motivation for new materialism, you can always say the primary motivation for new imperialism was to exploit natural resources to support industrial production. All right. the informal way to say it is countries went to other countries to take stuff that they needed to make stuff with. Okay, that's the way it works. And then the other part of that is, like when the U.S. was interested in taking over Cuba in the 1890s, one of the reasons was because we felt like Cuba would be a good place for us to sell our stuff that we're making in the U.S. And there's something out there called the China myth that's been going on for since the 1700s, and it's this thought that if you could sell one aspirin to everybody in China, you'd be super wealthy because there's so many people there. So this idea of these huge markets as an outlet for stuff that industrial people make is another reason for imperialism. So it's either to exploit the natural resources and the raw materials, or to get rid of production or find new markets for the stuff they're making. So that's really kind of the answer to that part of the essay question. And I'll talk some more about it. So as we go through this, just real quick, looking at my reading notes, so you know what imperialism is. It means one country taking over another country. And there's a couple of different ways that shakes out. The book will talk about direct rule and indirect rule. So like there was direct rule in India where the English, actually put like governors and mayors and people in to run the place. And then there's indirect rule where in India where there might have been a Maharaji who was like the official sanctioned guy or representative of parliament, and that person would indirectly carry out orders from the mother country. So there's kind of different types of imperialism. Again, time frame late 1800s. When you read the book, read about Cecil Rhodes. He actually had a country named after him, Rhodesia, and he was a big British imperialist proponent to the large extent. I mean, he even wanted to take the United States back from Britain in the 1800s. So for Britain, so he was nuts. But the reason the little excerpt at the beginning of the chapter is relevant is because it's discussing the fact that students at Oxford College years ago, decades ago actually, wanted Rhodes's statue taken down. He was a prominent donor at the college because it represented this white rule and colonial rule in Africa and India. So, very similar today when we're debating the disposition of these Confederate statues in the South with the Black Lives Matter movement. So, again, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it kind of rhymes. I mean, there's always the same stuff going on. So there's that. Read about social Darwinism. Again, when you think about this idea of European white superiority, that those people believed and that those people were talking about at the time, social Darwinism certainly plays into it. And as you read through, you'll read, Rudyard Kipling talked about, the white man's burden and how it was up to white Europeans and Americans and Western civilization to lift up all of these struggling third world societies. So that's sort of where they were coming from, a really superior and astounding mind frame to allow them to go to these other places and just take them over and say, hey, we're taking over your country, and we're taking over your culture, and we're eliminating your religion, and we're eliminating your language in a lot of cases. So it's a big deal, and thankfully, in some sense, the era of imperialism for now is subsided, but who knows? So there's that. Again. The chapter talks about Africa. There's some cool stuff in here, like the Swahili culture is really a combination of sort of Arabic and indigenous East African cultures that formed from thousands of years of trading with the Arabs, and so that stuff's really cool, the way these cultures form from markets. And what else do we have here? Just read through it. There's some cool stuff again, like women in colonial Africa and how the Western standards degraded the roles of women. So you see again how these other cultures that most of Europe thought were inferior were actually superior in a lot of ways, especially in or most of the time, not always, in gender relations. So. There's that stuff. It's really interesting. So enough about that. Read through it. And now let's talk about the assignment, because this is your first essay assignment this week. And all you have to do is follow directions and you'll be fine. And I'm going to give you the answers or potential answers and directions right now. as we're looking at it. So this week, what you have to do is you have 3 essays in this class, I think, 200 points apiece. So they're kind of a big deal, but you really have to work hard at failing one of these. And I use a pretty tight rubric with a couple of aspects. Aspects are like questions or things you have to do. Okay, so I'm going to just go through and tell you what to do. So you need to write a 1-paragraph essay. If it's longer, fine, but I don't see how it really could be. Unless you're using a lot of filler, which I'm not particularly interested in. So, I mean, you could write this assignment, I would say, in 3 to 4 well-crafted sentences without any issue. Okay, so give that a try. I mean, try to make it like 3, 4, 5 sentences somewhere in there. But let me go through and you can figure it out. So here's what you have to do. You have to describe the primary motivation or a primary motivation for this modern new Western imperialism we're reading about, and connect that explanation to an example of colonialism. So here's a great answer you can use. You can say that a primary motivation for Western or new imperialism was the acquisition of raw materials to support industrialization, period. An example of how this worked in the colonial world is the Belgian Republic of the Congo, where rubber plantations were built to provide raw materials for manufacturing, period. It's 2 sentences. I probably should have thrown a third in there to either introduce it or to conclude it. But again, that's all you have to do. Make sure you answer those 2 things. So if you look at this rubric that's on the screen, and again, the rubric's on Blackboard, so if the video is too small, don't worry about it. But the rubric says, for 100 points of this essay, the student provides a logical explanation with appropriate detail of one primary motivation for new imperialism. So one primary motivation is the acquisition of raw materials or resources. Another one is a marketplace to sell goods and services. So either one of those is fine. There's no right answer. You can use either one. So that's a primary. Those are primary motivations for new imperialization or imperialism, and connect that explanation to an example of colonialism. So look at any of them. So the book talked about Southeast Asia as a place where you could get, I think, tin and, I don't know, something else. You could talk about Hawaii and the exploitation of the sugar plantations, that the sugar is the raw material that was needed to support manufacturing. So talk about some specific examples. You can give 1 or 2 specific examples, doesn't matter. So follow the rubric, make sure you follow the directions, you're fine. The second thing you have to do is be careful with your articulation of response, which means write with college level writing standards, okay? You have to be like a somewhat decent writer. So before you turn the paper in, make sure there's no grammatical errors, spelling errors, capitalization errors. These things all count, and if there's more than 5 of them, you'll get 50 points off right away, because there's no excuse at this point. I use something called Grammarly online. It's free. You sign up for it. You can copy your essay, paste it into Grammarly. It'll tell you if you have any grammatical or spelling errors, and then you can just paste it right back into your assignment on Blackboard. So that's what I would do. It's entirely up to you, but at least read it back to yourself and make sure it makes sense, because oftentimes they don't. And then finally, the third thing you have to do on this assignment is to use at least 1 in-text citation. And I'm only doing this to get some of you used to this idea of identifying where you get your information. And I even provide a little example in the assignment instructions on how to do it. It's real easy. The citation will always be, well, I guess it doesn't have to be, but it's probably always going to be out of your textbook, and it's simply going to be the author's name, which is Diker, D-U-I-K-E-R, a comma, and the page number in parentheses, and you'll see an example there. So that's it for this week. It's about imperialism. It's important, I think, right now in the context of today, because I think it really shows us how racism and sort of European white Anglo-Saxon superiority has had an effect on world history, and it's something that we're still witnessing today. So that's it. Have a great week. Thanks, everybody. Don't worry about the essay. It's going to be fine. If you have any questions, give me a call. Have a great day. Bye-bye.